Good morning and welcome to HR Heroes, where we give back to the HR community and recognize the positive impact HR leaders are making every day. This week, we salute you and hope these sessions of learning and reflection support you in your professional and personal lives. My name is Annalisa Wilcox, and I am incredibly excited to be moderating today's fireside discussion on redundancy. We will be sharing open and honest stories on arguably one of the most sensitive topics in business, talking about challenges and opportunities, and hopefully also changing the narrative of shame surrounding redundancy. Now, before we get started, I would just like to tell you that all the sessions are being recorded and will be shared via email after the event. So you will be able to access all your favorites and catch up on any missed sessions. For those that wish to share questions, there'll be 20 minutes at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to drop your questions or share your struggles and experiences in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We would love to hear from you. So without further ado, we are very fortunate today to be joined by three of the brightest minds in HR. So let's begin by doing some very quick intros. Mel, let's start with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Annalisa. Good morning, everybody. My name's Mel Barclay. I'm Head of Career Transition and Mobility for the UK and Ireland for LHH. My role is supporting a team of consultants that provide guidance for people who are coming through outplacement programs with us. So they've experienced redundancy, and my team of career experts are the ones that help to guide them in terms of thinking about their next steps. On a personal note, I was made redundant many years ago, outplacement, when actually outplacement wasn't a thing at all. So I've had my own experience of understanding what that feels like. I'm also a coach, so obviously have some direct experience of working with people and seeing the struggles that many have in terms of coming to terms with losing their role.
Mark?
Morning, everyone. So I'm Mark Clements of Authentic Human Resources. So I'm a self-employed HR consultant and employee relations specialist. My journey and experience with LHH was back in my role as head of HR at Sony for 18 years. So I was very much on both sides of the table. I was a client, a corporate client, and used to send a number of people for outplacement consultancy. And then, like Mel, I've been through the experience myself. And yeah, I'm a big fan. I learned a lot and wouldn't be self-employed today if it wasn't for some of the guidance and coaching at LHH. So yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks.
Just me then.
Yes.
Good morning all. So I am Phil Mann. I'm an HR generalist. I look after most of the HR functions from a generalist perspective here in the UK and in France for Warner Brothers Discovery. So big media company was Legacy Discovery. We've just gone through a merge about 18 months or so ago. We're still figuring ourselves out as one big new team. Clearly, as a generalist, looked after a lot of people through restructure, and we've been using outplacement, across all my journey here at Discovery and in other organizations. So it's a key part of what we do and what the services that we provide when we are impacting people. I am about to go through the journey personally. I'll be leaving the company towards the end of the year. And the last couple of months I've been working with my bosses to talk about what that means and all the rest of it. So this is a very timely session to give some experience on the side of the fence of supporting people through it, and somebody who's just about to go through it personally.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you for sharing that. That's quite a personal thing you've just shared there, and we appreciate that. Redundancy, I mean, let's get into it. I mean, redundancy, it is a sensitive topic, and I think it'd be good to know what inspired each of you to say yes and join this conversation around redundancy.
To be honest, I just can't say no to Mel.
Oh, shucks.
Thinking about it, we've probably worked together over about the last 20 years in some sort of format. So, I mean, joking apart, you know, she's been very good to me over the years, and you know, was my own outplacement coach for some of the sessions, which was very useful. It is a sensitive topic, redundancy, and you know, back in the day when I first started 35 years ago, there was a bit of a stigma about redundancy. Oh, I must be rubbish, and you know, why me, and all. I think now it's much more sign of the times. There's constant change within business, so that's less of an issue now. But it still probably feels like that for some people. I mean, thinking of my own journey, I asked to go, and yet I still at times was questioning, you know, so I took a package, etc., but still was wondering, oh, they said yes a bit quick, and you know, my view is that everyone in HR needs to go through the process at least once, because it makes you so much more genuine and authentic when you're dealing with redundancy. For us, it's just another day at work, but it's that person's life. So I think it's taught me a kindness and an awareness that everyone's in a different place. But yeah, definitely not an easy thing on either side of the table.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with a lot of that. I mean, I think it is. So the main reason why I put my hand up is it's a really important part of what we do. Unfortunately, you know, we live in the media industry here, and it's an industry that's going through significant change, as a lot are, and so it's a fairly always on topic for us one way or another on a global basis. So the way we do that is important to us. It's important to me to do it well, and providing outplacement is a key part of that, to give people an extra sense of support for them. And I agree, Mark, with you. So going through it myself, and frankly impacting people in my team over the last few years, doing that as an HR person supporting a leader is one thing. Doing it as the leader for people who you value in your team is just super tough. And so doing it as well as you can is critical. And so I think this conversation is really timely, and allows us to debate how we do that well. How do we look after the people who are impacting, because they're all good folks.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, obviously, I'm sort of seeing it daily from the individual's viewpoint. So our candidates, the individuals who come to us on their outplacement programs. And I have to be really, really honest, it's not always done well. You know, those redundancies with our clients, some are fantastic in terms of really extending that care and support even before the consultation process, and certainly afterwards. But to be honest, a lot of those, have had repeated experience of waves of redundancy, and they've developed their skill around how to manage that process over the years. Some organisations, smaller organisations, really struggle. Sometimes that's because of lack of resource within the HR team. Sometimes that's just time frame. Sometimes we see some of these projects coming through in such haste that there isn't enough time for anybody to really think about how do we do this as well as possible. And I should add the caveat here, I'm not just talking about the people who are leaving, but I'm also thinking about the people who are left behind. Because, for me, the whole process of outplacement isn't just about shedding a certain sort of headcount. It's also the impact it has on the organisation, the culture, the survivors, the ones that are left behind, the survivor guilt, the organisation in terms of how do you get people back on track, and not just focusing on a restructure, the negative aspects of restructure. But from an individual's perspective, very often we spend our time with candidates telling them it's not you that's been made redundant, it's your role. And that's such a difficult message to embed if that hasn't actually been initiated by the HR team. And I know there's so much going on. They've got to have their information about their pension, their settlement, their consultation, all these things that need to be done from an administrative perspective. But that one single message, which is, it's not you, this isn't personal, this is actually your role, is something that we can't emphasize enough. So yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to sort of stick my hand up for this today, to try and share that knowledge and insight.
Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. I think there was some great nuggets that came out of what you've all shared. And one thing that stuck with me is, Mel, you kind of raised the lid there when you said some HR leaders just don't handle redundancies well. And, you know, I think we can all agree, it's a situation no one really wants to have to deal with. And I think, Mark, you said that, unfortunately, redundancies have become I guess, part of our lives. It is a prominent part of everyone's lives, either directly or indirectly. So HR leaders have to deal with redundancies a lot more frequently now. What would you say are the biggest challenges that HR leaders face managing redundancies? Because as Mel, you said, it's not easy. Some people aren't getting it right. You know, what are the biggest challenges that HR leaders are facing?
The biggest and most reoccurring challenge I've had over my career is that business want it done and they want it done tomorrow. Really completely unrealistic. So there's kind of two pieces. It very much a pushing back to the business to say, hang on a minute, this is the law, this is the process you have to go through. And trying to explain quite a convoluted consultation process to a non UK-based management teams, that adds another dimension to that. But yeah, so pushing back to say, listen to do the preparation properly, put all your energy into the front loading process, including management training, because they've perhaps never been through it before, and suddenly they're expected to manage it. So pushing back and being realistic about it. If you do it properly, you won't get the appeals, you won't get, you know, all the trouble that comes with it. Yeah, do it properly.
Yeah. I think that's right.
I've got sort of bruise marks for banging my head on the wall.
Right. I mean, I think it's really important sort of it's long before a redundancy happens, right? Our role as key partners is to make sure that we are trusted partners to the business, so that they know that if we're putting up a red flag to say, you know, look, I think you're going about this the wrong way, or I'm not sure that your story really stacks up. Let's be sure that we have a business case that is true and real and understandable by the poor buggers who are going through it on the far end. You know, then they know, look, okay, fine, we got to listen. So I think that partnership is an always-on role for us, regardless whether it's redundancy or not. But it allows you to have a stronger voice to design whatever it is that we're doing. Know your business, right? So it's obvious, but if you know the business well, you can then challenge if the business cases do look a bit daft, or if they're not strong enough. You can have a really good conversation to say, well, why are we doing that here? Because we've got a group of people over there with very similar roles. You know, should we be looking at them as well? So I think that's really important as well. And then just putting, I think you said it right, Mark, the legwork in up front. Think about all of the processes you're going to go through, collective, individual, whatever that is. How am I going to get just prepare the hell out of the upfront process? It won't necessarily make it easy, but it will make it easier, especially if you've thought through all of the questions that you might get, the context, how are we going to redeploy people, etc. Having a really good amount of work on that up front will certainly give yourself some help going forward.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
Yeah, in my experience that when LHH has partnered with organisations, when they have had visibility of the sort of the timeline around the restructure, and when we've had the opportunity to go in and really support the HR teams to get all of the impacted managers on board, that's when it has been a much smoother process. And I think that whole sensation of being in free fall comes about when you've got people who are expected to manage this sort of exodus of employees with very little training and insight. And if you've got an HR team that is really stretched, and you know, we appreciate the fact that that's the case in many organizations, even some of our larger corporate partners currently, that's when unfortunately steps are missed. And then you find that people in the organisation are uncomfortable about what's going on. They don't feel they've had the right training. They don't feel they've had the right support. And that obviously just flows through into the consultation process, the way the employees feel. So it's easy for us, to say, here's a blueprint in terms of how to make 100 employees redundant. We totally appreciate that that's not the easiest thing to implement, but I think sometimes, to Phil's point, really starting much further out in terms of that planning process, and just plan and plan and plan, make sure that everybody feels engaged, they know what they need to do, what their part in the process is. That really means that you've got a robust structure around letting people go. And they're still not going to like it. We appreciate that, but it means that sort of the actual process of having those conversations, being able to give people honest, authentic answers, making sure that they know what support is in place, that's all there. And then obviously when they do come on their outplacement programme, they understand completely what they're entitled to. We still get people coming through our programmes who haven't a clue who we are, what we're doing, and how we can support them. Such a missed opportunity.
A real practical issue that I faced over the years was the actual announcement day. Some messages are so complicated. Someone stands up and does an announcement for half an hour, and I think, well, I know you're making everyone redundant, and I haven't quite heard that message. You almost need a sort of one line: I'm very sorry, but your role's being put at risk of redundancy, and this is why. And a kind of practical test for me is that someone should know enough that when they go home that evening to talk to their family or their friends or their loved ones, my role is at risk because of X. It needs to be that simple, whereas sometimes it's so complicated, it's kind of lost in the process.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think I'll just come back to a point that was flagged, Mel, when you were saying most of our changes, at least in my organisation, the history of changes that I've been, have been restructure, reorganisation, or maybe something post M&A. That allows you, in theory, to have some time, maybe not much because everyone operates at pace. But if the world is actually, we're closing this business because it's gone bust, you might not have the time to prepare as much as you might like. Then it's a case of, look, I'm afraid, just pure hard graft to get your head into it as quickly as you can and figure out, how do I tell this story as quickly and as well as I can to the employees who are in these stores or the product that is shutting down, whatever that might be. So it can be hard work. There's no hiding from that. In fact, it is hard work every time. Sometimes you just have no time to prepare as well as you'd like.
I think one of the things that helps, though, and Phil, I'm not sure sort of what experience you've got of this, is when an organisation really embraces a culture of individuals, employees actually being in control of their own careers. And we're not saying that sort of softens the blow of a restructure and ultimately a redundancy, but if you have an organisation that is actively encouraging people to feel a little bit more in control of their career, feeling that they're invested in their longer term career, whether that's with that organisation or moving on somewhere else, I think people feel less as though they've been literally shoved off the edge of a cliff. And this is what people are telling us. This is what candidates are telling us. They hadn't seen it coming. They have been with an organisation for 15 years. They've never, ever thought about the idea that they've got to go and find another role. And, what's ChatGPT and generative AI, they're completely at a loss because they're not prepared for it. So I think the organisations that have that culture of encouraging employees to be engaged with their careers, I think it's less of a struggle in my experience. I think it's something that people feel it's still a huge challenge. It can sometimes be absolutely life-changing, but they don't feel as though they're unequipped to perhaps think about what that next step is. So, that's an even more of a sort of an extended timeline. That's creating that culture of people being career activists, never mind just sort of preparing for a big restructure and the inevitable redundancies.
Here's something I've learned. Well, I've decided, having been through the process myself, my new approach is not looking but ready. So my CV is always ready to go. I kept everything up. In other words, not so much now, but when you're in corporate, you've been through the process, you realise you could be made redundant at any point. So be ready to go. always have a sort of half an eye on the outside, what's going on. It doesn't mean you're disloyal or you're looking at, I think sometimes as HR people, we're not selfish enough. We need to kind of put a bit more energy into me and where do I want to go and all the stuff we coach everybody else on, but don't necessarily practice in reality.
True. I think that's true. I also think there's a question in the piece. We are kind of terrible as a function about looking after ourselves as well, and it is an unfortunate reality, at least as far as my experience, that we are often our worst customers and our last customers. So there's definitely something that we can do, either for ourselves as generalists, if we're lucky enough to have an HR for an HR function, whatever that might be, to improve that self. Inward facing a little bit for our own departments and our own selves. Agreed.
Kind of putting your own oxygen mask on first analogy, isn't
Correct.
it?
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, I've had the privilege of coaching a number of senior HR people who've been involved in big restructuring projects. And absolutely, they are the ones that are literally putting the lights out at the end of the day after the restructure, and they haven't given any thought. There's almost a sense of guilt that they're thinking about themselves when they've got all these wider teams that they're meant to be supporting. And there's been a real challenge, emotional challenge around thinking about, okay, what's next for me? And sometimes just persuading people to create some time to think about their own careers and implementing all the things that they're actually putting in place for their people, starting to address those for themselves. So again, going back to organisations being more invested in sort of careers generally, that's for HR teams as well. That's not just for the wider population. That's about all HR assistants, business partners, directors actually practicing what they're preaching to the wider population. As you say, Mark, is their CV in place? Are they active on LinkedIn? What's their network like? Is it purely inward facing? Have they got external contacts? Are they networking with other HR professionals? So all of these things often come after the sort of the announcement, but they should be there. They should be there all the way through.
Just to touch on something beautiful that you mentioned in terms of the emotional toll and the impact on mental health and how important it is for HR leaders to really focus on themselves, during this journey of redundancies. I mean, today is actually World Kindness Day. And I think kindness is such a powerful thing. And I think HR leaders need to remember to be kind to themselves. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more from all of you in terms of what are some examples of maybe leaders or companies or stories where you see, we're getting it right in terms of taking care of ourselves during what is probably one of the most emotional times in our lives.
I think it's having other people to share experiences with. And again, I think if you're an HR leader in the thick of a big or maybe a constant cycle of change, they often don't think about other people that they can vent to, share their experiences with, because they're too busy and they're putting everybody else first. So I think, I know Mark and I have had many conversations about this, and Mark is a consummate networker, but actually creating that permanent network of like-minded individuals, and that could be from your HR world or it could be from outside the HR world, but actually having that support structure is absolutely critical. And I think it's the individuals, for normally the reasons because they're being totally unselfish, but they're the ones that actually have neglected their network that struggle more emotionally, in my experience, than the ones that actually do have networks that they can lean into when things get really tough. So, it is about sharing those emotions, getting some support, or maybe just sometimes getting someone to listen.
If you're in a standalone HR role, because it's kind of lonely at the top, there's not people you can talk to or ask questions to. So I always found that, going back to my CIPD days, there were friends I sort of stayed in contact. And even now I run my own HR network because I've got former colleagues from Sony that are now elsewhere. There's always someone you can pick up the phone to and say, is it just me or does this feel a bit funny? Like a sounding board or just to have a vent. And I think that's really important technically it's called networking. I just thought of it always as having friends and keeping in touch, and and it's sort of mutually beneficial. Sometimes you need advice, other times you can give it, which is quite nice in itself to feel valued and appreciated. So yeah, it's good to talk, would be my sort of saying.
It absolutely is. And I think, the other part of it as HR leaders is making sure, because look, the resilience of our team as they go through impact after impact after impact, collective consultation, then, another month's worth of individuals, all the people who are having stuff done to them that is not necessarily their choice, right? They've lost control of a circumstance and you're trying to coach them back into a world where they're in control of a choice, whatever that can be. That can be really tough, right? Super hard, especially over a protracted period of time or a year and a half, post-merger, where there's always something else, and typically happening at pace. So as leaders, making sure that your team are talking to each other, finding moments to vent. I think Chloe said it right. You do need somewhere where you can just say, this, I need a break, I need to take a time, can you cover this one for me, whatever it might be. And then as leaders also have that piece, that place so you can go, be it your boss. I've got a WhatsApp group full of old friends that I used to work with who I would lean on to say, anyone got, take me out for a beer, I need a moment. And I just think that's super important. I don't have many other examples of who's doing that well, but I think the reality is we all need to tell people it's okay, encourage those relationships, encourage check-ins, like, how the hell are you doing? Do you just need to take this Friday off? Don't worry, I've got it, whatever it is, and look out for each other as we go through it.
I think, we talk a lot about our candidates going through the change curve, and as HR professionals, I'm sure everybody's aware of, what that curve looks like, and that sort of roller coaster of emotions as people come to terms with anything from redundancy to, bereavement, breakup of a relationship, and how they come out the other end. I think, again, from my own experience, HR leaders that I've coached and worked with really don't see themselves anywhere on that change curve, but they are. And in fact, they're probably swinging backwards and forwards like a pendulum as they go through that whole process of, planning the restructure, planning the timeline, putting people at risk, going through the consultation process, supporting their wider team. So actually, sometimes just going back to something as simple as that model, that change curve model, and sort of checking in with where they are, and perhaps checking in with their team. Where are you? Are you still in denial about the fact that this is happening next week, or have you come to terms with it? Are you feeling angry? Actually sort of calling it out. And I know as Brits, we're not terribly good about talking about emotions. And it isn't sometimes until people actually get into a coaching scenario that they feel that they can open up and talk about it. But so incredibly important for teams who are going through such a pressurized process to have that reality check. And I think the change curve for me is something that it really does help people to articulate where they are and where they think they need to be.
Companies have employee assistance program, but staff don't necessarily know what they are, which is basically something a company pays for anyway, whether anyone uses it or not, for exactly that reason. If somebody's having a struggle in life, divorce, ill health, money troubles, redundancy, whatever it is, there's normally free access to this site. And I've been banging the drums for years, and I would remind the HR audience here, you can use it too, even if you go in as a kind of with the mindset of a mystery shopper. But I've done that in the past and found it really beneficial. And it's in there, it's free, you might as well. And then you'll perhaps become an advocate to sell that and promote awareness of those sort of internal schemes more.
Yeah, I'm going to say something slightly controversial here, and hopefully you'll forgive me for it. But going through some of these large change moments where you are impacting a lot of people because there's a change journey, whatever that might be in the company, I reckon it's some of my best moments as an HR person, because you get into the trenches with people, whoever that is. You form really strong relationships with those folks, be it the business people, be it people who you're impacting, or be it your HR team, as you kind of wrestle through whatever the change is, making sure you're doing it right. You come off the back of it, and yes, you've gone through the mill, but those connections that you've formed as you've gone through that together are extremely strong for the future. And there's people like that who are in my WhatsApp group who I can lean on afterwards, because I know they've gone through it as well. And I think that's just, it's important to realize that it's hard, but it's kind of cool from a career perspective, from an exposure to difficult things. It is not all
I
negative.
agree with you, Phil. It's almost, sadly, the only time some business people recognise the benefit of HR.
Right.
And I can kind of feel, but like you say, once you've established that credibility and you know, that you were there for them and coached them through the process, they're much more open to listen about, you know, career development and more positive. Right.
And I love this, guys. I love that we're starting to look at the positives, because obviously redundancy, I think the topic says redundancy, threat or opportunity. And it might be strange. Can we actually embrace the opportunities and what are these positives? So if you can go a bit deeper on what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned and how those lessons impacted the way you handle redundancies?
On a personal level, I was at risk at one point, as was everybody in HR, and then I ended up running the department afterwards. So what these change and transformation programs can do is create new opportunities that maybe you didn't see. A slight change of direction or a specialism. So that can happen. And, you know, being a bit selfish, I took a package, a decent one, which gave me the financial cushion to have a go at setting up on my own. And it's kind of the best thing I ever did.
There you go.
Had that have not been an opportunity, maybe I'd have still been there, keeping my head down. And so, and the other thing is, it just sometimes gives you a moment to stop, a bit like lockdown did in a weird way. If you're suddenly at risk, you go right back to basics. What do I want out of life and of a job? And what are my values? And some of the stuff that LHH help you to think about is a really good sort of evaluation of where you're at. Sometimes you kind of end up in a role or you sort of drifted along. It just, yeah, it gives you a moment to reflect and refocus. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, and you hear these stories of people changing career direction massively and becoming opera singers or something. But that would be my take.
Yeah, I think I'd go with that. I mean, I had a moment, I guess it's probably maybe as long as 15 years ago, and I probably was approaching redundancy at that time quite tactically as an HR person, right? Here's the thing, I've got to go and speak to the person, blah, 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 blah. And I got a book afterwards, about a month, maybe probably about 3 months afterwards, a signed book from a guy. And he basically said, thank you for allowing me to stop what I was doing and go and do this thing. And he wrote this wonderful book. And that was the first time that I realized it actually is an opportunity. And I could talk from then on. Yes, people go through the journey, and the first meeting you're having with them, you're probably not going to say, hey, this might be an opportunity. But maybe by 2, by 3, you know, where they've started to settle, they realize that some things are in their control. You can talk about it, and is a genuine opportunity. Mark, to your point, have you just been ticking along? Have you kind of ended up in a role that's okay, but isn't really exciting you? Have you kind of doing it because it's easy, whereas now there's a threat, so you need to do something about that, but it doesn't allow people to make different decisions. Maybe for me personally, over the next few months, I'd just want a bit of a break, right? 2 or 3 months, do a bit of a life and health reset, do some personal training, things like that I've just neglected myself. And eventually I'll hopefully find somebody to pay the mortgage, but allows me to do a bit of a reset on what is important to me. And you know, good companies with decent redundancy packages allow for that. If you're only in statutory, okay, you need to find different ways to encourage the opportunity, and you know, LHH and others can help people with that as well. But there is true opportunity, even if it's at a pretty dark time. You have to help people get through that moment.
And I love that, Phil, because you've touched on something there. You've touched on the gift of outplacement and the transformative power that it can bring. And the truth is, and this is something a bit, as I said, I'm quite passionate about, the truth is many leaders still do not know what it is in terms of outplacement, and they do not use it. So how do you feel about that?
One of the issues I've had a number of times over the years are individuals saying, well, can I have the money instead? Whatever you're paying for this outplacement consultancy, I don't want it. Just give it to me, add it to my package. And I probably did do that early on in my career, but it's only when you go through the process and realize the power and the learning, it's almost like they don't know what they don't know,
Yeah.
or they don't know what they need in reality. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? So I've been in HR, whatever it was at the time, 30 years. Everyone kind of assumes, including me, that you're good at being interviewed. But you're not. I hadn't had an interview for 20 odd years. So one of the things that Mel organised for me was someone to sort of think The Apprentice, to kind of interview me real hardball and sort of rip me to shreds at my request to see how I cope, and then do a sort of a digest afterwards about, well, that was good, and you clearly don't know this and that. Do you see what I mean? So there's people don't realise the power of it, and therefore I'd have a sort of zero tolerance now to, no, you need it, whether you need, whether you want the outplacement consultancy or not, but you should have it. It's beneficial for whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's now I would see it as a requirement in organizations that are doing to provide the service, whoever it's with, because I think it shows an investment in helping people go through life after whatever they were doing. And I think that good employers do that maybe as a bit of a rote. It's a good thing. That's fine. The best people are people who lean into it and can encourage their people who they're impacting to say, look, go and take advantage of this. Have a look at it. It may help, it may not, but it's a service that is, you know, provided by us to help this change journey and change moment for you. It's almost something that I would look at as how do you go about doing things when I'm looking at new companies, right? Because if it's statutory and no support, it's probably not the organization that I'd like to be working for. So that kind of lean in, that support for their colleagues, I think is a really important piece. So not sure if I've ever had an active conversation with a leader who's sort of going, I don't really care about this, or, you know, because it's a default provision for us and has been across most of the organizations that I've worked for. But I probably have a dim view, like Mark was saying. If I found somebody who didn't, I'd be like, right, let me educate you. Let me tell you why this is important.
I mean, this is a no-brainer for me. I mean, what's the saying? You know, a dog isn't just for Christmas. Outplacement isn't just about finding your next opportunity. It's about actually taking control of your career. And if ever redundancy happens again, or you end up in a role that you're not happy with, you're not like a rabbit in the headlights and panicking about, I haven't got a CV, I haven't interviewed for 15 years, you know, I'm going to be at a disadvantage in the marketplace. And listen, we all know, we're reading in the media about what 14 million roles are going to be disappearing in the next couple of years as a result of generative AI. There will be other opportunities, but that is an awful lot of restructuring and an awful lot of people who are going to have to take stock around their careers. So yeah, you know, you may be feeling at the moment, well, Christmas is on the horizon, I'd rather have the money than go and sit and talk to a coach about how to think about my next role. But we're equipping people with tools so that they can become self-sufficient in the future. And I think that's something that, you know, HR teams maybe aren't focusing on so much. You know, when it's part of a package, when people leave, it's great, go and get your CV reviewed, go and have a chat with someone about what you want to do, let's give you a bit of interview practice. But it's so much more than that. It's about, you know, what are my values? Why do I work? What's important to me? What have I got zero tolerance for in terms of another role? What type of culture do I want to be employed in? You know, what type of organization? You know, have I got the ability to see a clear line through to that next role? You know, do I need someone to sort of tell me where my skills gaps are? There are so many different features that really you can't put a price on.
And also potentially to rebuild somebody's confidence, right? Because they may be entirely knocked because, you know, for reasons against their own, they've been impacted, and it's like, okay, well, maybe I won't apply for that job because it looks a bit big, and I just need to get back into a role.
Yeah.
No, you got to help people back into their strengths, what they can deliver.
And that's huge, Phil, that confidence piece, that self-awareness. And it's people, even our most confident senior people who come through on programs, and you think they know where they're going, they've got their network in place, actually you start unpacking, through coaching, how they're really feeling, and that lack of sort of awareness around their vulnerability, the fact that they are wavering a little bit in confidence, or they've got anxiety about how long it's going to take to secure that next role. If we can restore that, then that's a massive, massive advantage, never mind all the other practical stuff as well.
The most powerful part of the LHH session I went through was the weekly job club. It was probably called something else. So I was with a load of senior people, all being at risk of redundancy at the same time. And it's a bit like Fat Club or like Slimming World or something. The fact that you know that you're all sitting together on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock and you'd go through, well, how many jobs have you applied for? How many interviews have you had? What's coming up? It really is a bit like, I think you said earlier, Phil, a bit of a Dunkirk spirit. You're all in this shared emotional experience. And I'm still friends with people several years later, and see them now landing in other big jobs elsewhere. Really powerful, really because of just the emotional connection of it all.
Guys, I just wanted to say that we are at that timestamp where we have 20 minutes before the session ends. And I know there's so much wonderful, powerful stuff coming here, but of course, we would love to actually get to some of those questions that have been shared in the chat and give our audience a chance to, as I said, hear from you directly. So if that's okay, I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Paulina, for the Q&A session, if that's okay.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Annalisa. Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for this very interesting and equally very important conversation that we just had. I think I really particularly loved the most, Mark, when you said, and I've written it down, that our placement teach me kindness, which is, it's a lovely thing to say. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, during your conversation or our conversation, we had some very interesting comments in the chat, and I've picked some of them and kind of turned one of them into questions. But some of the comments that we had in the chat were touching on importance of line management in the process of redundancies, and I think that kind of really nicely touch on something that you said about, the importance of communications, that when the redundancy is happening, we need every department to be part of it. But also someone mentioned how change management, and I think, Mel, something that you also said, how change management should be offered to everyone involved in a redundancy process. So thank you so much for all the comments and interaction in the chat. But actually someone said, Rhiannon, and I've written it down, she said, it can be really difficult when you tell employees their role is at risk, but they feel the decision has already been made and don't want to interact with the consultations meetings. I think my question to all of you is how, as an HR leader, we can help or you can encourage employees to interact in those consultation meetings if there is so much emotions going through one's mind. Any advice on that?
I mean, right, I think there might be some dependencies on why somebody's not interacting, right? If they're just okay with the outcome and they want to go, you can reach out and make sure that they've got the opportunity to ask any questions, give them the opportunity to always come with you. There might be some I think the question's point was, okay, well, either I've been told that I'm the bottom scorer, for example, in a selection process, or I don't believe that selection process was fair and therefore I'm just not going to get in because I've got no trust and faith in the process and it's just artificial. I think there you have to understand, for me at least, where is the relationship? Is there a quality relationship with a line manager where you might be able to encourage the line manager to go and have a proper chat? If not, I think, the role of an HR person is pick up the phone and have a proper chat with them and say, look, what's going on? Let me have a proper chat with you. They may still not agree or fully engage, but just trying to get them into the process and okay, if they still don't, you have to be quite mechanical about it. But I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that they have really been given the fair opportunity to better understand the world that's going on, why it's changing, what their other options are. That's what we have to roll our sleeves and just get on the phone to them.
Thank you so much.
Over the years, I've had everything from people shouting and swearing and banging the table and crying and everywhere, you know, not speaking at all. Sometimes that's the most difficult thing. They literally so sort of in shock almost. And you can't predict it. That's what I've learned. You can't predict. You can have a big sort of burly guy that suddenly bursts out crying, or someone else that, yeah, everyone's different. And I think what you were referring to there, Phil, was sort of the culture and the way people are treated generally. And then it's all magnified perhaps at the consultation stage. But I quite like it. It doesn't happen very often, but as an HR person, I quite like it when someone exercises their right to, you know, submit an alternative proposal to the business plan, putting their role at risk or challenging the scores, or that, because every now and again one works, and I think good, it proves this is a real process, a real consultation, and not a farce that we're just sort of going through the tick boxes. So yeah, being able to, as you say, sometimes just have an honest conversation, slightly off the record, perhaps as the HR person, to make them sure they know what their rights are and options. And but yeah, you never know quite where people are coming from.
I think that's a really good point. We had an astounding counter proposal the other day. It was the best thing I've ever seen. Actually the best business case I've ever seen. This guy had clearly put a huge amount of work and effort into it. Again, it doesn't always work, but I think the fact that he engaged so well made us have some really hard questions to the leaders to say, well, actually, this looks legitimately like a quality counter proposal. Let's understand it. Let's explore it. And that engagement actually is quite reassuring to me, because it makes you say, you get to the end of it and go, okay, that was a brilliant counter proposal, but here's why we're not going to do it, or here's why we can't make all of that work. But it does mean that you have the high confidence that the commercial decision is really stacking up. If there's no real engagement, and you know, sometimes you just look at it and go, is that the right decision? Is that really there? And if you don't know the business all that well and you can't challenge it all that well, you kind of just following along the way. So I think that's why it is important for us as HR people, whatever seniority it is, to really get back onto the leader who's made the decision. I think there was a question about managers in those conversations, as far as is possible, having the people who made the decisions, who can explain it, who can understand the questions coming back, is important. And if you can't because of scale, you have to make sure that the managers who are having the conversations understand the context. They also may not agree with that. So you have to give them the time to go through it themselves, so that they can then look at their colleagues in the eye and say, here's why we think we're going to have to do this. That time spent up front, again, critical.
Thank you so much for sharing, and Phil, Mark, Mal. But we actually had a question come through on the chat for you, especially for you, Mal. So Pam is asking, when someone joins an LHH placement process, how important it is to match the right coach to best support the individual?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we get asked quite frequently by clients and by candidates, actually. My view on it is, I don't think it is that important, in the sense that all of our coaches are career consultants. They're experts in the world of careers. And in my experience, sometimes working with somebody from a completely different background from your own can provide huge challenge. It doesn't have to be that somebody has walked in your shoes to be able to support them on this outplacement journey. And in fact, to be really honest, all of our career consultants have been, working in career coaching for many, many years. That's why they are as experienced as they are. They may have had some prior experience in the landscape of our clients' organisations, but that's not what they're doing now. So any advice that they give to any of our candidates will be based on sort of their own, maybe some experience in the past, but it isn't current experience. We are leaders and experts in careers, so actually the match is more on a personal level, and I'm pleased to say that sort of 99% of the time we get it absolutely right. We make sure that if we've got somebody that is flagged as perhaps being vulnerable, or maybe somebody who's struggling a little bit with their mental health, we have got coaches who've got experience in sort of counselling and supporting people on that emotional journey, and we'll make sure that they are matched with that individual. But in terms of career advice, all of our consultants are extremely well equipped to provide that level of guidance. Again, if we've got somebody who's extremely senior, we've got executive coaches. So we have got some type of differentiation within our coaching community. But it's not a matter of somebody having worked in a hedge fund now being a coach and coaching somebody who actually is exiting a hedge fund role. It just doesn't work like that. It's not necessary. It's more about, you know, what they can bring to the table around their career guidance and looking at the job market. Mark, you've had experience of that, both from a sort of a client perspective, but a candidate perspective. What's your view?
I agree with you, actually. What I found was, although I had one allocated coach, they would sometimes say, actually, for this particular topic, you might be better off speaking to this person. So it didn't seem to be cast in stone, which was good. And I mean, if I think back to working at, I mean, I worked at Royal Bank of Scotland for 11 years, a media company for years, and then about a massive Sony for 18 years. And yet now my clients are local building companies, homeless charities, every sector you can ever think of, which has kind of tested and proved my own theory that HR's HR wherever it is. And actually, it's much more rewarding. I mean, to suddenly do work in safeguarding in schools, it's different. It's sort of the same, but different. So, yeah, I think it adds, as Mel said, another dimension. Sometimes have someone that's not necessarily an HR expert, for example, or HR experience. Yeah, you get different questions and a different perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Mark, actually. And Pam, thank you so much for the question, because this is one of the questions that we often, actually very often, being asked by our clients, but also by our candidates. And I actually remember when I've started my coaching journey, and I was being mentored by someone. And I remember when I first looked at who I've been matched with, and I remember looking at thinking, oh, they're not very senior to me. I wonder how much they can bring into the conversation. And gosh, was I proved wrong. So not only she was in the industry that I was in and I was looking to go to, but she wasn't very much in my eyes very much senior than me. But actually the mentoring bit that I had with that individual was really life-changing for me. So thank you so much for that. Couple of other questions actually I have. One is around AI, and something, Mel, that you've also touched on. So my question to you is, do you think that AI can have a positive part to play when it comes to redundancies?
I personally do, yes. And, you know, very fortunate to work in an organisation that invests hugely in technology and innovation. I think there's an awful lot of fear around AI, certainly amongst our candidates. And I think they're very, very concerned from a sort of a basic level that their roles are going to be taken over by AI, but also how AI is going to impact on them in terms of applying for roles or going out into the job market. From a coaching perspective and from an outplacement perspective, my view is that AI can take an awful lot of the quite boring legwork out of pulling together your marketing toolkit, thinking about how you're going to change your applications for different jobs, how you present yourself. And, you know, not everybody is a wordsmith. Not everybody has the skill to be able to articulate what it is that they're offering to the job market. And AI, if used correctly, can be hugely powerful. However, in terms of the world of coaching, I think that we will never replace the human touch. So I think it will do all of that groundwork. I think it will make it an awful lot easier and speedier for people in terms of getting their CV and their LinkedIn profile in place. But actually, when it comes to thinking about what's important to them, how they are actually going to project themselves, market themselves, you will always need the skill of a coach, a human coach, to be able to support that and give people that confidence. You know, Phil mentioned it earlier, just actually to build that self-esteem back again. So it's a combination of both, I think, for the future.
Thank you, Mel.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah, I think you're right. You're actually hosting a session on a very similar subject on Thursday. So I'm really
yes, not hosting so much as asked to contribute my BS to it. But yeah, look, I'm incredibly excited about the opportunities that AI brings, both to our organization and to our function. I think right now the most important thing is to make sure that we are all educated in how to use it best. And I think there is an opportunity throughout placement for that as well, right? If someone's not been exposed, what are the opportunities, what are the courses that you guys can provide to upskill people? Because I think the first wave of impact isn't going to be that AI has replaced my job, but it might be somebody who knows how to use AI has replaced my job. And so I think it's important that we future-proof our organization and our HR roles as quickly as possible. I think there is some value in placement support, and actually I think there is value of an AI as, I'll call it an educational coach, not a true coach. But I was watching a very fascinating video the other day where an education company is using an AI in lieu of mentors, so that you can ask them questions, it can look at how they've approached answers and suggest different ways and remind them what they've learned, etc. And it can also be helpful to protect against cheating, inverted commas. So I think there's some huge opportunities for recruiters, for our whole function, frankly. Very exciting.
Yeah, AI is going to have a positive role to play in things like, equality, diversity and inclusion, and ruling out unconscious biases that sometimes happen now. So there's definitely areas where it can help, but are we ever going to be in a situation where human beings will feel free opening up their heart and being vulnerable and sort of having those career type discussions with a robot or a machine? That I'm not so sure about, and I wouldn't.
Thank you.
Assuming you're all real.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I think maybe just the last question, obviously very mindful of time, and I know some people have to jump on articles at 11 o'clock. And so the last question I have for all of you is, if you had to give one advice to HR leaders faced with redundancy, what would you say?
Being faced with redundancy themselves.
So you can either face it yourself or advice for everyone who is facing redundancy.
I would say, if somebody said it, see it as a potential opportunity rather than, the end of the world, and embrace it. You can't change it potentially, so embrace the journey. Mindset is everything. Think positive. Think, I'm going to end up somewhere good. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think I'd go with all of that. Just lean into it. I mean, sometimes these things happen to you. Sometimes you engineer it yourself. All of these are positive outcomes, right? But just lean into the change and figure out what's important for you.
Thank you.
And support yourself, surround yourself with positive people. I think that makes a huge difference. That's not sugarcoating, I'm not belittling it, but I think the importance of having people who've been through it, had that experience, but actually have seen the benefits and the opportunities. I think that's hugely important when there's a very bumpy road ahead of you, just to have that support in the sidelines.
Thank you very much. So I guess this is really concluding our Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone. Annalisa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. That Q&A was amazing. And thanks again, Phil, Mal, Mark, for your honesty. And to all of you, thank you so much for participating and joining us today. I personally believe redundancy is a perfect moment in anyone's life to reset, to reflect, to refresh, and find a new adventure. There is no shame in redundancy. So in the spirit of World Kindness Day today, be kind to yourself wherever possible, especially to yourself, and enjoy the rest of the event.